Well, that's what we're revisiting today, the outcome of that conference, which has since been submitted to the president. We're joined now by one of the delegates of that conference, Mr. Supo Shasore, who is a senior advocate of Nigeria and the immediate past Attorney General of Lagos. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, lots of people have described that, some of them, that it was indeed pleasant. No doubt, the smiles you also saw there. But what was your experience at that conference?
Well, a mixed bag, a mixed bundle, really. To coin a phrase, the good, the bad, and indeed the ugly. We saw all of it in the 4.5 months that we were there. The good in the sense that despite the fact that there were so many flaws in both the arrangement and conceptualization of the conference, there are some good recommendations there that I'd like to talk about later that need to be really activated. The bad in the sense that you saw that we still have those forces of regression, forces of status quo, the forces that are resisting change. And they're all across the country. There's no monopoly. They're in the north, they're in the east, they're in the west. So that was regrettable, that there's still so many people who the system will throw up as representative of people's ideas. The ugly in the sense that there were some aspects of the reporting that were, I'd like to say, less than honest, in the sense that you found that the report suggests that there was very little dissent or no dissent at all. The report suggests that we were always unanimous. It's not true. There were indeed many areas in which we disagreed and were unable to agree. And yet the report suggests that, you know, the 492 people there somehow came to voice voting to agree on these 600 recommendations and 10,300 and something pages of a report. It's unlikely that Nigerians in a room could even agree on one document. So that's what I mean by the good, the bad, and the ugly. It was a mixed bag.
What was the good part of it?
Like I said, the good part in the sense that there's now a policy report recently formulated by a representation of Nigerians. And I can talk about the representation and the flaws that has. But there is a policy report on issues ranging from agriculture to transport that covers the current thinking in the Nigerian political space and intellectual space, that the government, the presidency, the federal executive government, because this was an executive national conference, not a sovereign national conference, has now on its table to implement. And I think there's a call to action on the part of Nigerians in the sense that this is a participatory democracy. There are certain recommendations there that can be carried out by the national executive without further ado. Nigerians should insist on those things being done without delay. I mean, the national conference was an executive conference, wasn't it? Sovereign national conference. It has representations only of 108 from the states. If you multiply 3 delegates per 36 states, you come up to about 108. The rest of the 492 people were appointed by the presidency. So it was skewed against proper delegate representation. It spent billions of naira on its organization and its completion. It now has 600 recommendations. Nigerians should insist on those recommendations being implemented without further delay as the only justification for the entire proceedings.
Okay, because I was looking through some of those recommendations, and let me even talk about that part where you said there were lots of people there across the country who didn't want change.
Yeah.
Was it that was the case from start to finish, or did they at some point saw a reason why, okay, maybe in certain things we should allow this be? Because one wonders, how would they just from start to finish say no, no, no?
Oh, no. I suspect many people did change their persuasions, their leanings, and they were influenced by superior thinking on some occasions. But I say it's bad because some of the things that are rather obvious. For instance, I represented the Lagos State delegation, and we canvassed for some, I thought, pretty obvious things. And we were not able to prevail. That's the nature of things. The right to disagree is a right that everybody must protect. But that people were able to resist change in certain areas was disappointing. And I'll give you an example. We felt that the whole issue of resource control has been sort of pigeonholed into mineral resources alone. And we thought that it's only equitable to return to what Nigeria used to be, to allow resource control, to allow people not to be alienated from the fruits of their land. In an area like Lagos State, where over 90% of value-added tax is generated from Lagos State, and for Lagos State to receive 6 to 9% of its value-added tax generation, I mean, it's almost, if that's not social injustice, it's quite clear. And for me not to be able to convince my compatriots that this is an inequity that could visit your community, that is probably in your community as well, if you search deeply, and to even the playing field in that area, those are kind of things that people did not want to change. Even the whole superiority of the federal government vis-a-vis the state governments, I thought that is unforgivable, because this is why we have a total reversal of our situation maybe in 1960 and 1963, where the federal government and the government in the center was receiving 23% of the revenue to be allocated. And the states and the regions, later to become states, were receiving 53% of the revenue to be allocated. That is what we were trying to drive for, and for people to be trying to resist that, it's disappointing.
Did it sail through? Because truly the whole argument or the whole definition of national resource control, when it's mentioned in Nigeria, what comes to mind for a lot of people is even oil. So now you just situated it properly the way it should be. Every locality or region has its own resource or potential that it can draw from. Absolutely. And if you're talking about even the tax issue, that's another aspect which is key. But were you able, or some other of your compatriots, were they able to espouse this point to the extent that others saw some kind of reason in that argument?
Yes, we were. I mean, for instance, the Lagos delegation, we went in with 11 major recommendations. We had other things, but we pushed 11 recommendations in our position, and we came out with 6 of them, which is more than a pass mark. Many of them have things that have been agitated in the public space before and have now entered the mainstream. They're not even, some things are not even peculiar to Lagos alone. One of them was this revenue reallocation. So the recommendation that came out of the conference is now that what we were trying to achieve is a situation where if you take the local government and the states together and you add their percentages, it must exceed the federal government. And that's the recommendation that came out. Unlike what we have at present, where the federal government gets 50.6, the states get 26, and then the local government gets. So if you add the local government and the states together now, the federal government gets more. And that has its own incongruities. So Lagos State, for instance, went in with 11 recommendations, came out with 6. And there were things that cut across the board, from revenue to the removal of local governments as a tier of government, in the sense that you cannot restrict the power of a state to create local governments. That was passed, and I think that is a radical and very welcome departure from the current situation we're in. We mustn't forget that this uniformity in the creation of local governments from the center only started in 1976 under the Obasanjo's decree creating local governments. In the past, native areas and local government areas were something that the regions and the states were free to do for administrative convenience. So that has now entered the mainstream. It's in the report. I think that is a major achievement in the sense that it allows states to organize themselves the way in which they do.